Glad to have everybody here. I don't know if you've all been watching the screen, but who saw the screen about our Go Wild for Jeopardy? Okay, well, if you haven't, we are having our annual fundraiser is a Jeopardy theme. It's a Jeopardy show. I love watching it. I'm really bad playing it, but my friend is really good at it, and he feels very smart when he's doing it. And I don't feel so smart, but it's good. Anyway, the show's going to be a ton of fun. It's our way of raising some funds for Ding Darling. We can't do our normal event that we have in here that raises hundreds of thousands of dollars for an event with silent auction and all of that sort of thing. So we're going to try it different and do our Go Wild for Jeoparding. And you can watch it at home and know that it all goes to support 100% is tax deductible. Tickets are $25, or you can even do a ticket for yourself in a class, or you can have the Alex Trebek level. We normally charge $150 for on-site locations, and you can pay $150 and get the Alex Trebek with a button. So there's all sorts of levels, but it all does go to support, and it is a lot of fun, and April's the one who was brainchild of this, but we professionally taped it. I'm telling you, it looks like the real Jeopardy show. So I think you'll have a lot of fun with that if you don't have plans to do that, but it's a great way. So I encourage you to be a part of that. Okay, now I'm going to get started. So thank you for being here. We appreciate it. And it's a weird time. We've changed things up, and appreciate everybody working with this. COVID-19, hopefully we're hearing that May, everybody in the world should be vaccinated. Who knows? I'm still waiting. A lot more people are waiting. It may not happen, and that's why we're going to stick with the whole mask. Even those of you, and I hope many of you have already received. How many have received their vaccines? I like it. That's good, but a lot of us haven't. I'm one of those too, and so we always are cognizant of those who don't, and we're going to follow the same protocols for safety, and I appreciate you guys all following that, so thank you. Normally I go into the song and dance about who we are as the Ding Darling Wildlife Society. I'm the executive director, Bergie Miller. I've been there now for, I think it's going on 12 years. But I served on the board for 4 years before that, and I've been on the island for over 21 years. So I feel like I'm a big part of this island family, and certainly a dingbat, as I'm called oftentimes. But I'd rather be called one of Ding's darlings. But it is a great organization, and I feel very proud of being a part of it. And so we're going to show a little video about who we are as an organization, and if you aren't a member, we'd love to have you join as a member, and you can join back there. If you're not receiving our Ding on the Wing e-newsletter, I've already convinced someone to sign up, but if you're not getting that, please sign up. You can always click delete if you're busy and don't have time to read it, but it's a nice update on things that are going on at the refuge, on the islands, and all of that. And you can sign up for that in the back of the room too. Okay, April. The nice thing about this is we have to test it so that it's working for the speaker. All right, so while they try and figure things out, I will just tell you who we are and not show the video. It is a really good video, and it does a far better job than I do about who we are. But yeah, if you could come up here, our IT expert, we need the video and microphone working for the speaker, because he does have a lot of sounds with his program. Okay, so the Society is the nonprofit arm of the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. It was just celebrating its anniversary and 75 years, and the Society is going to be celebrating its 40th anniversary next year. We came about because the refuge was getting less and less support from the federal government to do the programs that they needed. In the last 20 years that I've been here on this island, the staff of the refuge has been cut by 50%, the budget has been cut by 60%, yet the visitation to the refuge has increased 66%. So there's a whole lot more people coming to see this refuge than there were staff people being able to do the work that they need to do to conserve, protect, educate, inspire. And the Ding Darling Wildlife Society comes in to fill in some of those gaps. And if you haven't seen the WOW, the Wildlife on Wheels rolling around, that is outreach to schools that just can't get to the refuge. So we do things like that, but then we also do the nation's best restroom. How many people have seen the nation's best restroom at Ding Darling? It's fabulous. Okay, so for those arms who've not been up, I make people, when they're going up the ramp, I go, you need to go to the bathroom, and they look at me like, who the heck are you? But they need to go to the bathroom because they are amazing restrooms, and it's all about taking advantage of blank white space, and if it takes 2 minutes to let them learn a little lesson about a bird on the toilet stall door, then we've done something. But the main part was these kids were coming by school bus, and the first thing they have to do is go to the bathroom, and so they were all standing up against this white blank wall, fidgeting and thinking, when are we going to get outside? Now they can be interpreting the outside wall because there's a manatee made from bicycle tires. There's flip panels where they can learn about plastics in the ocean, and lots of different things that they can learn while they're waiting to go to the bathroom. And then when they go inside, it's even cooler, and they even learn something in there. So it's a great interpretation tool for kids, but also for adults. So you need to go to the bathroom. But we do things like that. We do the scat trail. We have Jim Sprankle here and a number of other volunteers who are in a little video about the scat trail, and that gets kids out to Indigo Trail. And we're all kids at heart, and you get to look at fake animal poop and learn who would have left it and all of that sort of thing. So it's all fun. And we see this young man here who loves owls. So we're excited he's here too, and that's what it's about. It's inspiring this next generation to want to preserve, protect the space that our owls need and all of our wildlife need. Healthy water, huge. We're big advocacy supporters with the society. We can do that, and that's a lot of what we do too. The refuge can't do that, but we can, and we can get all of you to say, write to your congressman, write to your senator, please write to your state representatives or your county representatives who are impacting guidelines and rules on water quality and flow and all of that. So we all have a voice in conservation, and it sounds like it's working. Good timing. It's telling me to hoo-hoo, quiet down. Yes, that was the voice of conservation. Is who's out there who cares? Everybody out there cares. And we appreciate you being here. It shows that you do care. And we love people who love owls and all wildlife because that's what it's about. So thanks for being here. I'm going to introduce our speaker now. So we could not do this without our sponsors. And Bill and Lori Harkey are sponsors of this lecture. So thank you, Bill and Lori. Bill is also a member of our board. And we use and abuse them a lot, so thank you. Paul Bannick is an award-winning author and wildlife photographer specializing in the natural history of North America with a focus on birds and habitat. Coupling his love of the outdoors with his skill as a photographer, he creates images that inspire conservation and education. His work can be found prominently in bird guides from Audubon, Peterson, the Smithsonian, Stokes, the National Wildlife Federation, and many others. He has appeared on NBC Nightly News, Evening Magazine, King 5, and dozens of NPR stations and programs. I've actually heard him on one. Just released in October, The Great Grey Owl, a visual natural history, sparks the imagination and wows us with visual beauty. And if you didn't see the books out there, we do have them for sale, as well as his other 2 books, all autographed and all going to support the efforts at the refuge. It is available here and at our other location across the street, basically. But Paul does inspire, and his presentations are wonderful. And I think many of you here have seen him before at Ding Darling and in other places, and you're back because he is so good. And we appreciate Paul coming here and his friends being with us as well, their first experience on Sanibel. And we're excited to hear about the Great Grey Owl. So please join me in welcoming Paul Bannick.
Everyone okay with me taking my mask off up here? Okay. All right. Great. Thank you, first of all, to the sponsors of the talk today. I really appreciate you making it possible for me to be here. And thank you, Ding Darling, for inviting me back. you know, before this COVID thing came, I was here last February, and I'm from Seattle, and when I arrived in February, they just announced COVID was discovered in Seattle, and people asked me where I was from, and they stepped back. That was my last public presentation. I've been doing about one a week on Zoom, which is just not the same. So doesn't it say a lot about Ding Darling that they're able to figure out, back to back, my 2 presentations have been here in 1 year, and normally I'm somewhere every month. So they made it possible and made it so everyone could feel safe. And I speak at a lot of festivals across the country, and this is such a professional group in making it really easy to partner together, to communicate, and put on a good show for you all. So I'm so grateful. So please do consider becoming a member, and I hope to come back to talk about Snowy Owl another time. How many of you have ever seen a Great Grey Owl? How many would like to see a Great Grey Owl? So we'll talk about the Great Grey Owl a little bit. The Great Grey Owl is one of those owls that always sees you before you see it. It's a mysterious owl. It's known by names such as the Great Gray Ghost, the Phantom of the North, the Bearded Owl, and many other names. If you want to see the Great Grey Owl, your best bet is to arrive in places where it's freezing cold, where the light is low, and squint, strain your eyes to see along the horizon, on the edge of the trees, or at dusk and dawn, when the owl is taking flight. You have to look carefully, but if you're lucky, you might find that owl flying straight towards you at eye level, looking you right in the eye as it catches a vole at your feet. And this was my first photo ever of a Great Grey Owl, and it was at Zaxton Bog in Minnesota. And my first ever opportunity, the owl did just that. It flew towards me in the dusk, and I was knee deep in the snow. I'm looking right at its eyes. I said, oh my goodness, I didn't know that much about it at that point. That was over 20 years ago. I didn't know if it was going to hit me or not, but it flew right down and went face first into the snow at my feet. The Great Grey Owls hunt using their hearing. And when you see them hunt, they will plunge face first into the snow, and they will afterwards appear stunned for a moment or two. And that was one of the things that really made me curious to learn more about this owl. Why was it diving face first into the snow? First, a little bit about the physical characteristics of this owl. This is the largest owl in North America in terms of wingspan and in terms of length of the body. The wingspan's about 5 feet. The length is 27 inches from the top of the head to the tip of the toe. Notice this very distinctive facial disc. That facial disc is basically a ring of feathers connected with a muscle that complements this incredibly acute hearing and acute eyesight, and that it funnels sound to offset ears. The ears are simply holes in either side of the skull. They're offset. So for each of us, if one of you was to make a noise, I would turn towards the noise because our ears are on the same plane. For an owl, the ear is on a different plane, meaning the owl has a sense of the direction and the height of the sound. And they use that facial disc much like we use squinting. It's sort of the audio equivalent of squinting. They can expand and contract that facial disc to funnel the sound to triangulate exactly where it is. The more distinctive an owl's facial disc, the more that owl relies upon hearing to catch its prey. Notice too the wedge-shaped tail. A long tail in an owl tells you that that owl hunts in force or hunts among trees because a tail is like a rudder, helping the owl turn. And also, notice how small those feet are. Those feet are tiny. The size of an owl's feet hints to the type of food it captures, more accurately, the size of food that it captures. And then distinctively with this species, notice the bow tie or the beard. It's called the bearded owl in Scandinavia. But that bow tie is distinctive in this particular species. Now, while the great gray owl is the largest owl in North America, it's only the third heaviest. So this great owl can take flight standing upon this thin limb of a pine, and the pine is not bending at all. That's thin little twig, allowing the owl to stay hidden even as it's preparing to take flight. Also distinctive for this species is the degree of camouflage. All owls are camouflaged, but the great gray is as well camouflaged as any species. And what I find remarkable is most species have a particular background that they blend into. Typically, one of the more common trees found where the owl's found. But because of the great gray owl's cryptic coloration, the browns, the grays, the whites, they actually can blend into almost any tree species. Here it is in front of an aspen snag, flying, yet you can't see it. And then here it is on a perch tree. Looks like an eraser head. And again, you can't see it. I walked right up to it before I found it. When the owl flies, you'll also notice, particularly when it's taking flight, those incredibly long legs. And if you look at the morphology of owls, you'll notice that owls with longer legs typically are in either thick vegetation or in deep snow. The owl also uses those long legs in hunting, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Look at the way the owl's perched. Look how small that twig is. Another benefit of having tiny feet. The great gray owl is found in some of the most beautiful parts of North America, and in fact, similar regions throughout the world. So circumpolarly, they found in what's called the boreal region, the region between the Arctic and the mixed conifer forests. And in North America, these are places like Wyoming and Montana and California, Oregon, Washington, and then also in Minnesota and Michigan. The great gray owl requires mature forests with giant trees where the owl can seek refuge and hide during the day. And where it can find appropriate nest sites. The great gray owl, a nest site for the great gray owl simply needs to be a platform. But that platform needs to be about 40 to 60 feet high, and it needs to be 36 inches in diameter so the owl is hidden from below, so that people and animals do not see it atop the tree. It also typically needs a canopy on top of the nest so that raptors and corvids do not see into the nest and potentially prey on the nest or eggs. But equally important is that mature forest is adjacent to a large meadow system of some sort. That can be a bog, it can be a wetland, it can be a meadow, it can be a rancher's field, but it needs these wide open areas because it preys almost exclusively, about 90% of its prey are gophers and voles. And those animals need these broad open areas. The great gray owl, since it hunts primarily using its hearing, it wants to be as close to the prey as possible. Most of the prey that it catches are within 30 feet of any individual perch. So what that means is even if you have this incredibly large meadow with lots of voles and gophers, if you do not have perches scattered throughout, if you do not have an irregular edge to that meadow, the great gray owl will not be able to hunt prey. Structurally, this is the most important thing. Again, mature trees typically old mature trees and large open areas. Here's what it would look like from above, and this is taken from a hillside. That's very typical great gray owl habitat. But the tree species don't matter much. This is a mountain meadow in Oregon. Again, mature, in this case, white pine forest mixed with ponderosa pine, and a wet meadow where voles can be found. Here is a forest in south central Idaho, and this is Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. Again, mature forests and openings. And this is in Glacier National Park, a wildflower meadow surrounded by mountains and mature trees. And this is in ranch land in eastern Washington. Ranch lands can be very important, and farmland for great gray owls. They are compatible with these lands, and they'll control a lot of the voles and the gophers the farmers may not like, but they will take advantage of those meadows, the fence posts, the irregular edges, if they have them, hay or straw bales. It's interesting, the great gray owls, they live in Canada and Alaska, and then they come down in fingers into the United States, in the western mountains, but also in the Great Lakes. And what's interesting is the boreal populations, or the Alaskan and northern Canadian populations, feed almost completely on voles. And the populations of voles typically skyrocket and plummet. And as a result, the populations of the owls also skyrocket and plummet. But it means that during good vole years, you can have lots of owls. In contrast, in the lower 48, particularly in the west, they feed on gophers more than voles, but supplement with voles. Gophers have smaller populations, but their populations are more consistent, meaning the owls stay on one territory year-round. They can supplement when, particularly during the nesting season, when those prey items are low, they can supplement their food with other prey. While we see great gray owls, photos of great gray owls during the day, great gray owls are mostly nocturnal and crepuscular, coming out when the light is low or even absent. Well, I guess the light's never absent. When it's at nighttime is when they're hunting the most. The exception being when the nights are too cold and so the snow cover freezes over, then the owls are forced to hunt into the day. And those of you who have seen great gray owls, for instance, how many of the seen great gray owls saw them in Minnesota or Michigan? Okay, probably a lot of people. And you're going to see them more often there during the early mornings and the early evenings when it's a little less cold than in the middle of the night. The owls will hunt and love them. And someone once said they look like flying logs, and they really do. They blend into the environment, and they're hunting just above the ground, flying just above the ground. When a great gray owl is hunting, it will spend several minutes, sometimes even hours, at a single perch, turning its head and listening for several minutes at a time in each very mini specific direction until it's circled the whole tree, and then when it's about to take flight, it doesn't give any warning, it just goes, except if it hears prey. If it hears prey, oftentimes what it'll do is it'll raise its wings up to balance it so it can take off at exactly the right moment. Typically, the owl will fly from perch to perch, trying to get lower and lower, closer to the ground, circling in on the prey. Because when you're using your hearing, you want to be as close as you can to be most accurate. And this great gray, if it was any lower, its tail would be dragging in the wildflowers. It's really remarkable to see this. And when the great gray owl pounces on its prey, it also stays hidden in the grass or the snow for a while. It's very careful about taking off. It looks around to make sure there's nothing competing for the potential prize. It is worth noting that usually great gray owls catch food that they do not even see. The Great Gray Owl is only 3 pounds, yet it has the power, the force, to be able to punch through snow and ice, capable of carrying a 180-pound person and still come up with the prey. It also could use that force and that strength to punch through turf, the sod here. This particular Great Gray Owl was hunting in a farmer's field in southeastern Oregon, and there were gophers. And I'd watch this owl as it flew a zigzag course over this meadow, and it would arrive right at the openings of the burrows at the same time as the gophers. And it'd be waiting there for them. A bad day for the gophers. But eventually this owl had so much food that he skipped following the gopher, and he would just stay at the entrance to the best hole and hope a gopher might come up. That didn't work quite as well for him. Great gray owls, when they do approach prey, not only do they progressively perch lower, but they also attempt to get that facial disc parallel to the ground. So they spiral downward. Sometimes they can take off with great force, but they will spiral downward, approaching the prey, until they get the face right above the ground. So that first day, when I saw the great gray punching his face through, what I did see was this. The face is getting close to the ground, but notice the feet. The feet are pulled back. The legs are pulled back to give it the greatest amount of force. And then at the last instance, they're punched through the turf. And so while it looked to me like it was forcing its face through the snow, it actually was punching those legs through. And here's a great gray who's just pounced upon a vole, but didn't quite get the vole. Look at the tail. And watch as this owl reaches for that vole. So it's still listening to the vole, and it's feeling around with its feet. And watch what happens to that tail as it reaches. The owl sinks. It's as if the feet are connected to the tail, so it lunges for the prey, the tail goes down. And look how deep this owl is under the snow. The fluff of the breast feathers are up against the bill. And fortunately, it did get the vole. In the early spring, when the snow was still on the ground, the great gray owl is calling in a way that feels like a heartbeat. You really feel the call as much as you hear it. And like other owls, the great gray owl fills its throat up with air and pushes those hoots out. And they're not loud, but they're pulsing. And the owl will call from a number of different potential nest sites, trying to bring the mate in to consider one of these. And if a female accepts the invitation, like this female that's already in this nest, and by the way, that's a ponderosa pine. Look how well camouflaged she is inside that nest. She has accepted his invitation to investigate that nest. But unlike any owls, other owls that may consider a nest site for a couple minutes, this female great gray owl might settle down in that nest for a few nights and days, testing it out. During courtship, the male begins to feed the female, and he feeds her throughout the courtship and throughout the time when the young are in the nest, until the young are able to keep themselves warm. He does all the feeding to allow her to save her energy. When young are in the nest, the owls are constantly hunting. And if the male gets small prey like shrew, the owl may eat that in the field. But most of the prey is brought directly back to the nest and the female. And the male will make a circuitous route back to the nest and the screaming young. I can't tell you how many times I followed a hunting owl or tried to follow a hunting owl back to the nest. And it knows it's being followed. So it actually flies opposite from the direction of the nest to lure you into the deep woods, into the real tangles where it's tough to get around. And then it quickly moves in the other direction, so you have no clue of where it's nesting. It'll nest in the broken tops of trees or abandoned raptor nests or even in mistletoe brooms like these. The female stays mostly hunkered down in the nest when she's on the eggs, and until the nestlings are about 2 weeks old, you won't see the nestlings. You won't hear them. You'd have a very difficult time seeing that female. Here's the young at just a few days old. And here is another week later. And at this stage, the male will deliver the female most of the food directly at the nest. And listen to that chittering noise. Incidentally, that's the same chirring noise that the female makes when the male is feeding her during courtship. And now the young are also making that same noise. And if you look carefully, you'll see a head of one of the youngsters right underneath the female. And then when the young are about 2.5 weeks old, they start filling the nest. And now they know to be they can thermoregulate on their own. So the female will start receiving the food away from the nest. So here's the male delivering food to the much larger female. Females can be up to 30% larger. And the young at this stage are constantly hungry. So the female is frequently begging for the male to bring food. And look at this young, Mom, I'm hungry. And here she is rushing out to receive food from the male. And notice the size difference. As I said, the female can be 30% heavier than the male. Eventually, at about 4 weeks of age, the young start flapping their wings and climbing out to the edge of the nest, and it appears as though they're attempting to leave the nest. But I think it's always the mother's decision when those youngsters leave. For 10 years, I tried to capture a photo of a young owl intentionally leaving the nest. And I did it in Wyoming, California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, British Columbia, Alaska, the Yukon. I spent tens of thousands of hours trying to get a Great Grail youngster leaving the nest, usually left in the night. Sometimes they were knocked out of the nest by the errant wing of a sibling. Sometimes it looked like the mother was going to let them leave, and then they would fall asleep on the edge of the nest. Sometimes they would climb onto the branches surrounding the nest, and I'd be thinking to myself, does that count? Am I done? Did I get the photo? And then they would leap back into the nest after branching out. And this one teased me for a while before eventually saying, no, Paul, this wasn't it, and hopping back in. Sometimes they'd be 3 or 4 feet above the nest and then climb back in when I was hoping to leave. Sometimes they just climb out the branches and then climb in the surrounding trees, and they do leave. But it took me 10 years to get the dramatic shot where the owl crouches down, he's 50 feet up in a tree, and he leaps. They can't fly. They somersault, they flap their wings, and they bounce on the ground. There they are, helpless. Should you approach one, they would puff out themselves, and spread their wings, and try to look as large as they can, and clap their bills. What's critical at this stage in their life is their ability to get off the ground. So it's important that in our forests that host great gray owls, that there are leaning trees, leaning, standing, dead trees that serve as ladders, allowing these owls to move progressively off the forest floor and up into the canopy. The young owls, until they're capable of controlled flight, which is a few weeks after they leave the nest, about a month after they leave the nest, until that point, they're always trying to get higher up into the canopy. This is the awkward teenage stage. He looks a little more like Ben Franklin than an owl. This owl, the parents had just begun to leave the owls. And before I should mention that when the owls leave the nest, the mother, after about a week, she leaves the family and she takes off and eats with other owls and hangs out with other groups. The male looks after the owls, but the male is an amazing parent because not only will that male look after those young all by himself, but if he comes across first of all, if he has a weak owlet, one that is weaker or smaller than the others, he will give it more food, not abandon it. He'll catch it up with the others. And then, should he come across orphaned youngsters of the same species, of course, he will take them in and raise the young of other owls as his own and feed them all. But eventually, he pays attention to the young owls, and as they develop their skills, he will eventually feed them less and less and encourage them to be on their own. But what's funny is, these owls, they will constantly beg, and occasionally the dad will come back and bring them food. But even after the parents have been gone for a couple weeks, and they haven't had any feeding, every time they wake up, they still beg to be fed, as if a parent's going to drop out of the sky from somewhere and feed them. But the parents are long gone. But even during that time, the young owls roost together. When they go to sleep, they call, they find each other, and they roost next to one another. They go off to hunt, and when they're tired, one will start screaming, the other will scream, they'll find each other, and they'll roost together. And during this time, they are actually pretty good at hunting, but they'll experiment a lot with different foods. They're not centered just on voles and gophers yet, but this one was hunting grasshoppers, hovering above them in a field. But eventually, typically, when there's an extreme weather event, in this case, the snow falling, the owls move on. It becomes more difficult to find food. These two young owls can no longer share a territory with one another or with their parents, so they'll move on. Great Grey Owl habitat. Great Grey Owls share their habitat with a number of other animals, not just Canada jays, in this case a Canada jay harassing an owl, but a few other owl species, northern hawk owls, that are found within boreal owl range, but in burns or bogs. Boreal owls that are found in spruce forests, and the boreal owls are usually closed canopy spruce forests. Caribou in many parts of the range in Canada and Alaska. Grizzly bears, which interestingly, if you think about it, the natural grizzly bear habitat is very similar to the habitat of the great gray owl. The large meadows and the old forests. Fisher, marten. And the great gray owls are not just an animal of extreme wild. And while we really need to think carefully about how to protect their habitat, they're not incompatible with people. Great gray owls can do, in fact, they need to do well alongside ranching and forestry and farming. The key thing is to understand their needs. Here's one in a ranch, and they do just fine alongside ranches as long as the largest trees are left, and as long as hunting posts, such as this old stump, are left in some of the fields, and the edges are irregular. And as long as we leave leaning trees for them to climb and hunt from. One of the biggest dangers, one of the biggest threats for the great gray owl is fire. Fire is increasing throughout North America for really two reasons. One, because we prevented fire for so long that the forests are full of fuels, but also climate change is warming and drying our forests, making accidental fires easier to start, particularly man-made ones, and making those larger conflagrations and more out of control, more what stand replacing burns, as we call them. So those two together, the extra fuels combined with the warming climate. And here's a great gray owl in the shadow of a large fire. And fire is a problem. Fire is actually really good for them in small doses because it can clear out the smaller trees. Great gray owls do best where you have a lot of tall, big trees and then some leaning trees, but not a lot of smaller stuff because they hunt directly on the forest floor or on the meadow floor, and if there's too many little branches, it's difficult for them to hunt. But when the fire is too extreme, it can wipe out all of the large trees as well and make them fall, and they'll have no cover to hide in. But here's a great gray owl nest. You can see the youngster right up here in a burned tree in Yosemite National Park. And they did fine in some of the areas where it was not a burned in a more extreme way. Here's one in a burned tree. If we learn what they need, they can live alongside us. They can inspire us. They can remove the animals we might consider to be pests. The other challenge for great gray owls, and the thing that takes more great gray owls than anything else, are collisions with automobiles. Because the great gray owls fly low, and they oftentimes hunt along roads. So when we're in great gray owl country, we have to be careful to drive slow and watch out. Because look at this one, it's flying above the road at just about grill height. And more are lost from collisions with vehicles than anything else. But if we're able to take care of these, and if we're able to be conscious of what we can do to reduce climate change, if we can be mindful of the way we thin our forests to ameliorate the impacts of climate change, but to leave some of the essential habitat elements. And we also think about what pesticides we use. Some of those can be detrimental to owls. They can live alongside us. And right now, great gray owl populations are stable in the US. Any questions about great gray owls? Yeah, sir.
Paul, can you build a platform that would mimic the breed?
Great question. Yes. You knew you could, right? You can, yeah. You can build great gray owl platforms. So if you live in great gray owl country, you can get the plans for a great gray owl platform. You can actually go to Cornell website, and I know people who have built those platforms that had great gray owls move in the very first year. Again, it needs to be about 40 feet up, and it needs to be under a canopy. It needs to be near a meadow, but not right on the meadow, and under the cover of large trees, and they can do quite well. Yeah. How many outlets do they have? They have between 1 and 3. In the far north, they don't breed every year. They only breed when prey is abundant. In the south and the west, they breed every year, and 2 is most common. Yeah.
You didn't seem to show any pictures of the vole.
Oh, you know, I didn't show many pictures of the vole. You know, sometimes I show pictures of the voles and people get a little sad because the voles are a little cuter than gophers. Voles are this cute rodent with eyes up at the top of the head. I mean, I imagine it's so they can see the raptors coming down at them. But yeah, I get mixed responses when I show voles. Yeah?
Do they cohabitate with great horned owls?
There's a good question. Do they cohabitate with great horned owls? Great horned owls are one of their few predators. Great horned owls will prey upon their eggs and their nestlings. Fortunately, their habitats have some overlap, but they have a distinct difference too. Great gray owls really prefer to have a deep forest to nest within, and they have no problem hunting in the open. Interestingly enough, great gray owls are more always in kind of mild open areas. So they don't while they don't retreat to the deepest, darkest forest, they don't like them. They like to be in a little more open forest. They also don't hunt as much out in the open in those same situations. But there's enough overlap where they're the biggest challenge for great grays. Yeah, the back.
Yeah, I was wondering if they cohabitate with barred owls. I live in northern Michigan. We see a lot of barred owls, but I've never seen a great gray owl.
Yeah, great gray and barred. The barred stays in the forest more. The barred owls are a big problem for our screech owls, for pygmy owls, for northern spotted owls. It doesn't appear to be a big challenge for great gray owls. So they can cohabitate. In fact, if you go up to Sax-Sim Bog in Minnesota, every year there's both barred owls and great gray owls in pretty close proximity. Any other questions? Yeah?
If the nestlings fall out of the nest,
Yes.
to rescue them or can they survive on their own?
Great question. In general, 90% of the time, if an owl falls out of the nest, because of how helpless they look, we assume that they need help. Usually they don't. Most large owls, when they fall out of the nest, are better left alone. If they're in an area where there's a lot of cats or dogs, and you can do it safely without getting hit by a parent, you can put it up on a branch, and that's about the most you would want to do. Fortunately, owls don't have much an olfactory, so the parents won't be able to tell you've touched the owl. The bigger danger is that you leave a scent trail to that baby owl for a weasel or a fox or a badger or something else with a keen sense of smell. But great gray owls, great horned owls, barred owls, all leave the nest before they can fly, and that's natural. And they can climb trees quite well. If you encourage it to be at the bottom of a leaning tree, or even create a leaning tree that goes to a larger tree, that's another area, a better thing than calling protection service of some sort. Yeah.
I noticed in a lot of your pictures that they're carrying the bull in their beak,
Yeah.
where a lot of raptors would carry their prey in their talons. Is that a function of the size of their talons, their beak?
That's a good question. Why are they carrying their food in their bill rather than in their talons? And I think it is a function of the talon size, but also you'll see that with all owls, that they really are only tearing, they're using the feet to hold the prey while they tear it with their bill, but they're generally going to carry the prey with their bill so they can take off and land more easily. Yeah?
Have you spent any time in our nearby area to photograph growing owls?
In San Marcos or in, I have not yet, but I want to. I would love to get that timing right and photograph you growing owls. Yeah?
Are pesticides a big problem? We're reading in the local newspapers how some large birds are dying as a prey.
Yeah, the pesticides are a big problem. And the ones that are a big problem are rodenticides that use a chemical called warfarin in them. The reason is that rats are really smart. And most rodenticides in the past, a rat would eat the rodenticides. The other rats would see what it had eaten, or they'd know what it would eat because they're social animals, and it would see it would die, and they wouldn't touch it. So the poison would no longer be effective. So they developed this warfarin, and so it's an anticoagulant, so it kills the rodent more slowly, which means the other rodents don't know what it ate that made it sick. So they all eat it, and they all get sick, but it kills them so slowly that in the meantime they're moving more slowly, and they're moving at weird times in the day. They're not staying under cover as much. They're basically dying slowly and losing their senses, so they become prey more easily. And then the owl or the raptor that eats them bleeds out as well as the rodent. So it's a big problem. That's problem number 2 behind collisions with vehicles. Yeah?
Are there other options for pesticides then for the rat? Is there a better?
Is there a better option? Here's the thing. As we all know, rats are smart, and they also have so many generations so quickly that they become immune either by knowledge or by genetics to whatever rodenticides we use fairly quickly, but no rat will ever become immune to the talons of an owl. So owls and raptors, and encouraging owls and raptors, can be a great way to reduce your rodent load without introducing the pesticides. If you live in certain situations where there are no raptors and there are no animals that are gonna eat that, I can understand, but if you're somewhere where raptors are, you gotta be really careful. I will say this, interesting, like the screech owl, for instance, you have lots of eastern screech owls in Sanibel. Do you know that eastern screech owls do best in suburban areas? They do best near homes. Any place. They do far better in your backyard than they would do in the wildest part of the state. Because the predators that prey upon screech owls are less common where we are, but rodents and insects are more common near homes. So you can use them to help control your pest load in a more effective, cost-effective, and environmentally effective way. Yeah?
Do owls have crops where they can store food?
Do owls have crops where they can store food? No, but owls are really good at stockpiling and caching. And stockpiling is when they basically put the food at the nest and they store it right beside the young. And caching is when they actually put it in holes in trees, or they put it under moss or under leaves. And owls have this incredible spatial memory. Owls do not see in the pitch dark. Not only is there rare that you would find pitch dark, there's always a little moonlight, but owls hunt actually the most on a moonlit, windless, rainless night because they can see better and hear better. But what they do have is incredible spatial memory that allows them to know where they put their food, but also to memorize each perch in their environment so they know where to land and where to take off, and they memorize where the food is and where the prey's cavities are and everything else. Yeah?
Question. I have an old woods behind me. Pretty well cut down or pressed down and then a meadow. How would you encourage screech owls? Or how would you encourage them? And secondly, I also have bird feeders. Would the owls eat the birds?
Yeah, good questions. So, the ideal screech, how many of you have screech owls nesting in your yard? In a box or a natural cavity? Okay, so red or gray?
Gray.
Okay, so the screech owls prefer, and you'll have to tell me if this fits what your experience is. The best screech owl scenario for a nest would be you get a box from an Audubon chapter, or build it from Cornell, or maybe the Nature Center makes them that you can purchase them. They typically have about a 3-inch hole, and you put it on a tree, or you put it on a pole, either one will work, and you put it under trees, because they like to be covered above, but they like to have nothing underneath the nest or in front of it, because they typically like to approach like this. They like to fly down and up in this little U right up in the nest. So they want a little flyway right in front of the hole, but otherwise they want vegetation. But the interesting thing is they want vegetation behind the box, not in front of the open. That way they're safe from predators, but predators aren't going to come in the front and use branches to get in the front. So that's the best scenario. Not in the open, so a little bit of canopy, trees behind, not trees in front. So I would imagine like a palm tree, and there would be, some palm leaves over it, and it's tucked at the edge of your yard, and behind it is all bushes. That would be ideal. Is that kind of similar to what you have?
It's a golf course. So
Oh, perfect.
It's an open, it really is just what you described.
Perfect. And if you do that, and ideally you put up more than one box, you have a better chance, because sometimes while during the nesting season, oftentimes they'll roost in the same box. Outside of the nesting season, the female and male each have a different roost. So if you have more than one box, you have a better chance. And about 10 to 15 feet up. Is that what yours is? Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yes. Oh, I was avoiding that one. Yes, they do. Not a lot. It's secondary, but they will occasionally take a bird. Their primary is going to be deer mice and worms and beetles, and It's basically insects to small rodents, but occasionally they may take a sparrow or a finch. Yeah, I've never seen them do it. The thing is, screech owls, unless they have fast-growing young of a very old age right before they leave, they're mostly just going to hunt at night, so they're not going to take the birds. But they're opportunistic, so if their young were hungry and they weren't finding a lot of food, and they had a finch and it was happened to be roosting close to a feeder or hanging out the feeder and it was dusk, they might.
What about hawks?
Hawks will.
What does it take?
Yes. Those are hawks called accipiters, either Cooper's hawks or sharp-shinned hawks, and maybe even red-shouldered hawks can take birds. But red-shouldered not as much as a Cooper's or sharp-shinned. Any other questions? Yeah?
Do you need to clean out the box?
Do you need to clean out the box? Ideally, yes. And ideally, you just clean it out by emptying all the contents and then using a mixture of bleach and water and just wiping the inside of it. Other questions? And that is basically to reduce the parasite load. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Do these great grays that you're photographing acclimate to your presence or get to know you?
It's a really good question. Do the great grays I'm photographing adapt to my presence or act like to me? Yes and no. When I'm photographing them, I try to keep a certain distance. Like I'm photographing almost all those shots are with a 600 millimeter lens and a teleconverter. So I'm typically much further from me than to you. I'm much further than that, and I'm oftentimes in a blind. Like if I'm in a nest, I'm in a blind that's been up there before I've been up there, and I'm climbed 30 or 40 feet in a tree in a blind. So do they know I'm there? Probably, but I'm not moving in and out. I'm not making noise, so I'm not interfering. The number one rule if you want to be a real photographer is don't change the behavior of the birds, because you can tell it in the birds. They won't go about their natural behavior. Now, I say no because I really don't want them to acclimate, because I want them to be okay with me, and they know that I know the rules. So typically what I will do is approach from the same way and leave the same way, and approach and leave at the same time, so I'm not unpredictable. So they don't perceive me as a threat. When you change, you approach, you back up, you approach and you back up, you move different places, then they don't know what's safe. But if they know you don't intervene at a certain distance, they just grow accustomed to the idea. It's like an invisible fence. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
What about in the Great Lakes? Do they go around bigger bodies of water?
Good question. In the Great Lakes area, which is one of the best places for great gray owls, do they go in and around large bodies of water? The best places for voles are wet meadows. So the best places for great gray owls in the Great Lakes area is going to be near the lakes where you have wetter areas, wetter forests, spruce forests in particularly where spruce and tamarack mix with birch or aspen. I guess they call them poplars up there.
Yeah.
So poplars, tamarack are going to be your best areas. Bogs and burns are some of the best areas. The most predictable place in North America to find great grays is going to be the Great Lakes area. Any other questions? One last question? Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
As you can see, he's very passionate. He gets all of us passionate about it, and it takes everybody working together. As I've always said, there's no one person, one group, one organization who can do it all. We all have to work together. You have these, you say, do they need trees? Do they need land? Do they need to be near bogs? And what? They need the land. They need the space. And I think we all work together to protect what remaining space is out there for our wildlife, whether it's the owls or the voles, and all of that. There's no more land, so we have to learn how to share it with our wildlife. And many of you have helped us acquire some lands as well, and thank you. But thank you, Paul, for what you do in telling the story so beautifully through your photography and speaking skills. And thank all of you for caring. We really appreciate it. But it does take the support. If you guys like playing Jeopardy, Go Wild, Go Jeopardy site to buy your tickets. Buying things in our store also help us. We have our other store at the 2250 Periwinkle location with lots of different things than what you can find at the Refuge. But most importantly, get outside. Getting outside, especially during these times of COVID, has re-emphasized the importance of outdoor spaces. And it takes everybody caring and making a difference. So thank you, everybody. We have one last lecture next Friday, The Feather Thief with Kirk Johnson, and we hope to see you there next week. So thanks again for coming, and thank you, Paul, for your time.